Good morning, everyone. Merry Christmas. Thank you for joining me. How are you? Have a good day, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, now we will come to today's news. Something appears to be happening in Brazil. There have been a number of reports of military mobilization throughout the nation in preparation for what may indeed be an armed intervention. In their current constitutional crisis, we're going to see precisely what's going on in Brazil. We're going to learn what led up to this current constitutional crisis. Military mobilization throughout the nation of Brazil are becoming more and more frequent of late, a mobilization that suggests the military may be ready to act and act decisively in the midst of Brazil's current constitutional crisis. On October 30th of this year, the ultra-leftist Lula da Silva barely defeated the incumbent nationalist populist president, Jair Bolsonaro, winning by just 1 percentage point. Now this comes after he was touted for months by the legacy media both in Brazil and here in the United States to win by upwards of 15 or 20 points. The whole controversy of whether Lula was even allowed to run in the first place was completely ignored by the complicit media. In 2017, Lula, who has a long track record of supporting drug dealers and all kinds of illicit activity in Brazil, was sentenced to 9 years in prison after being convicted. And one of the biggest corruption scandals in Brazil's history, what was called Operation Carwash, he was up until that point a very successful president. He served 2 terms during a relatively prosperous period in Brazil's history. So he does remain very popular, particularly among Brazil's poor. But his corruption did indeed eventually catch up with him, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. And that, of course, opened the door for the rise of Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil's first nationalist populist candidate. He's been hailed as the Trump of the tropics, and he won in a landslide in 2018. However, something sinister happened since then. What we have to understand is that in Brazil, it's not so much the president that's been invested with supreme powers that were. The president actually has rather limited power and influence in Brazilian politics. The real power, when all said and done, resides in Brazil's Supreme Court. The court itself is comprised of 11 justices, and of those 11, 7 were appointed by Lula as well as Dilma Rousseff, who took over from Lula. Only 2 were appointed by Bolsonaro. And the court is seen at least by half the population as a puppet court for Lula, whatever Lula wants. 7 of the 11 judges deliver, and one of them did just that, to the shock of millions without any explanation. One of the Supreme Court justices overturned Lula's conviction, simply stating that it lacked necessary justification, and that in turn freed Lula, not merely from jail but once again to run for president, which he did with the full endorsement. The monolithic endorsement of the far left won't be a Marxist media, most especially our media here in the United States. However, when election day arrived, the runoff in late October, Lula barely squeaked by, and needless to say, tens of millions of Brazilian patriots didn't buy the integrity of the election. Since then, Brazilians by the millions have taken to the streets in defiance of the presidential election, with no sign that these ongoing several-month-long protests are going to stop anytime soon. The problem is that Brazil does not have an equivalent to an election oversight commission. So the people feel like they have no recourse to challenge perceived election irregularities. And that is precisely where their military comes in. There's a constitutional provision called Article 142 that allows for military intervention in the case of a constitutional crisis. And given that Bolsonaro has yet to concede to Lula, and given the shenanigans the corrupt Supreme Court has engaged in, and tens of millions of Brazilians out on the streets, while obviously those tens of millions are calling for the military to intervene. And that's precisely what we may be seeing. And some significant news. 2 words that always go together. It seems as though they cannot live without each other. Word number 1 FBI and word number 2 PSYOP, and it's crazy to think just how significant, just how impactful, and just how regular the PSYOPs continue to be, from the Donald Trump Russia collusion hoax to the Gretchen Whitmer kidnap plot to the supposedly FBI connection in January 6th, and now the totally exposed Twitter FBI connection. And the most significant story from this connection, the suppression and misinformation surrounding the Hunter Biden laptop story. It's one after another, and thanks to the Twitter files we are finally getting a clearer view into how this shadowy corrupt system operates behind the scenes. We got Twitter Files Part 8, friends, and it continues to hit hard, bombshell after bombshell. Alright folks. Take a look at this from Leifang on Twitter. Twitter Files Part 8: How Twitter quietly aided the Pentagon's covert online PSYOPs campaign despite promises to shut down covert state-run propaganda networks. Twitter documents show that the social media giant directly assisted the U.S. military's influence operations. Twitter has claimed for years that they make concerted efforts to detect and thwart government-backed platform manipulation. Here is Twitter testifying to Congress about its pledge to rapidly identify and shut down all state-backed covert information operations and deceptive propaganda. That's of course what they say publicly, but what they do behind the scenes quite different. But behind the scenes, Twitter gave approval and special protection to the U.S. military's online psychological influence ops. Despite knowledge that Pentagon propaganda accounts use covert identities, Twitter did not suspend many for around 2 years or more. Some remain active in 2017. A U.S. Central Command CENTCOM official sent Twitter a list of 52 Arab language accounts that we used to amplify certain messages. The official asked for priority service for 6 accounts, verification for 1, and whitelist abilities for others. We have this email dated Wednesday, July 26, 2017. From Nathaniel Beat Kaler, CRT CENTCOM CCJ3. Thanks. Redacted name. Sure is tough to do a WebOps when you can't tweet. I've attached a list. The first 6 on the list are priority accounts. Ideally, we could have them verified, blue checkmark, and whitelisted. If there is such a thing, one of them at Yemen Current is currently not indexing at justice_AR currently has a request in for verification but haven't heard anything. The rest are accounts were used to amplify certain messages. Ideally, they could be whitelisted as well. Again, if it's too big an ask, the first 6 are the priority. If you need any sort of paperwork or verification from our office or SOCOM, please just let me know. And I mean, the direct language speaks for itself. Sure is tough to do. WebOps when he can't tweet. It's yet again another on the record live from Twitter executives. How are we supposed to trust anything that they have said over the last couple of years under oath when it's been nothing but lies? The government isn't using Twitter to spread propaganda? Of course not, says Twitter executives. But then here we have an email from a Pentagon official requesting verification and whitelisting and phony amplification to control messaging and claiming that it's really hard to do WebOps. If you can't tweet, another massive lie. The Twitter Files Part 8 thread continues, but I don't necessarily want to spend most of the video reading through. Plus, I'm sure a lot of you guys have already read Twitter Files Part 8, or you can go and read it yourself. The first couple of tweets are good enough. And you can pretty much get the picture. Twitter directly aided the Pentagon in its covert online propaganda campaign. It makes you question everything, all of the narratives, all of this information that we are fed from social media and media, all of it which seems to constantly push one direction, one specific narrative or groups of narratives that all move in the same direction. It makes a question how much of it is manufactured. How much of our reality, of our political reality, our news reality, or information reality is organic, genuine, and how much of it is just a massive PSYOP campaign. All roads seem to constantly lead to the federal government and federal agencies, and hypocritically, it's the exact type of thing that we spend so much time criticizing foreign nations for, whether it be Russia, China, Iran. We constantly criticize and make claims about these nations using spy networks and government agencies to control narratives and control ideas, control information, use propaganda to steer the collective mind of the populace. But it seems as though we're always learning that the exact same thing is happening here, and it makes us think about that connection. I mean, the leftist hive mind, for instance, they're all like a bunch of mindless NPC drones. Pushing and promoting whatever the current thing is. Are they just victims of the next FBI, Pentagon, CIA PSYOP? It seems as though this might actually be the case. It seems as though the Western world might not be as free-thinking as initially thought. All of the most mainstream narratives, all of the discussion, all the talking points that have dominated the media and political sphere over the last however many years, but it's probably been going on for decades, but especially over the last 6 years since Donald Trump won in 2016. It seems as though it's ramped up big time. Well, almost all of the narratives, talking points, and discussion points seem to trace back to federal agencies and, of course, social media and media. There seems to be some sort of collusion network between these agencies in the media to all promote the same thing. You know, that's where these compilations come from. We often ponder whether it's corporate interest, or what's behind it all. What makes the social media companies and media companies want to pursue what can only be perceived as bad PR, bad press as possibly the end of their business? I mean, look at the rubble of the mainstream media, look at the current state of CNN, Twitter, and most of these social platforms. They've all taken massive hits. And so you question what the motive is going woke, censoring speech and whatnot, but it seems, at least based on the information that we have now, that the real motivation is the federal government behind them. Take the most powerful corporation known to mankind in existence, it pales in comparison to the US government. The government has the ability to print money, tax the population, collect trillions of dollars at will, create laws and regulate wage wars. No matter how powerful of a corporation, no matter how rich an individual or an entity, if the federal government comes knocking at your door and says dance, well then you're gonna put your tap shoes on real quick. And behind all of the narratives, behind all of the censorship, we continue to find one common denominator: federal agencies, whether it's the deplatforming or censoring of individuals, unapproved thought. You think it's a coincidence that all of these social media platforms on the same day decided to deplatform Alex Jones all at the same time? I don't think so. You think it's a coincidence that when the feds lose control of a narrative, all of a sudden all the social media platforms at the exact same time implement policy changes that dictate what you can and cannot speak about so they can maintain control over the narrative. It seems as though it's no coincidence at all. Mark Zuckerberg let the cat out of the bag on the Joe Rogan podcast, and Elon Musk unleashed the friggin' Kraken with this Twitter Files expose. We're living in a world of corruption and propaganda. We're living in a narrative fairy tale. At least it seems as though most people are at this point after we've seen all this moving forward. It's gonna be hard to believe anything what is truth, and what is fiction. Federal agencies are using social media, the media, and celebrities to craft narratives and to promote propaganda. I mean, let's do a little flashback here. Artist Moby says CIA agents asked him to spread the word about Trump and Russia. They're everywhere. It's everywhere, and so many of these narratives and so much of what the media covers always seems to be directly connected to or part of some sort of CIA. Crazy to say it, but the tinfoil hat wearers were right again. Thanks for sticking around. Follow me daily. I will do my best to show you. There's a lot of information that shows what's going on. Remember, where we go one, we go all. See you.